All right, here we go. One more time. Today is Monday, July 2nd, 2018, and this is episode 221 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. I hope you got your Q2 metrics submitted on time today.
I did. Yeah, my all my TPS reports are in, and it's all good.
It's amazing the automated messages I get about all the crap I have to do every quarter. It is really quite stunning. But hey, I'm glad we got the podcast going. We were thwarted by apparently one of Jerry's children downloading a large game and sucking up all of our bandwidth.
Yeah, majorly. They're currently sad because they have only 5 megabits to play with. So yeah.
we were DOSed by your spawn.
All right, so just a reminder before we go too much further that the thoughts and opinions we express on this show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. So item number 1 is thank you to our Patreon donors. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Item number 2 is you have something to give away. So,
hey, Jerry, guess what I got? I got something to give away.
Really? Tell us about it.
I did. So... B-Sides Atlanta, which is a great little show in Atlanta, run by this time by Professor Green, Andy Green, who is a friend of the show and someone we know.
All around good guy. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. None of those things are mutually exclusive from each other. Had some giveaways at the end of B-Sides Atlanta, and somehow, some way, I won a class, a training class, an InfoSec training class from a guy by the name of Chris Sanders. And as much as I appreciate winning the class, and there's a couple different classes that you can choose from. He's got a whole course library. He's got investigative theory, he's got practical packet analysis, and he's got ELK for security analysts, effective information security writing, good stuff. And also Cuckoo's Egg Decompiled he offers as a free introduction to his classes. So anyway, I won this class, and I figured it would be better to give it away to one of our listeners.
Yeah, well, you're in management now anyway, so it's like be wasted.
Right. I have had the management lobotomy. So there's, this is purely just a happenstance that we want to do something good for the listeners, and appreciate Chris donating this to the raffle at Atlanta B-Sides, and we appreciate Andy Green for running the show and selecting my ticket to win, and ultimately here we are. So here's the catch: we don't know how to give this away.
And it's such a trouble, right? I mean,
so. Yeah. What we want to hear from you guys is good ideas of how we select the winner. So tweet at us, email at us. Our Twitters are @Lurg and @MaliciousLink, or email us at the show, info@defensivesec.org. Thank you. I almost said .com. That would have been wrong.
Yeah, defensive security.
Thank you.
Yep, defensivesecurity.org.
Right. So what's the full email again? Because I screwed that up.
info@defensivesecurity.org. Yep.
Right. Or tweet our show account, which is @DefensiveSec, with your ideas of how we should give this away. And by next show, we'll have an idea of how to give this away, and then we'll give it away.
Absolutely.
How's that sound?
Absolutely. And by the way, if there's any other good ideas that I like, I've got 2 DerbyCon tickets to give away too. So
wow.
Could be an interesting and epic show coming up.
Well, sometimes people raffle those away or auction them away for charity, which is something that, or we could give them away. I'm just throwing out options.
I do like the auction for charity, but yeah. Well, let's see what the ideas. We'll see what ideas we get back, and then we'll go
absolutely.
from there.
So that's what I had.
Good.
We can get into stories.
All right. There's been almost nothing happening in the InfoSec world.
Well, it's the holiday. It's the holidays. It's the travel season. It's vacation season.
True.
People go places and do things.
True. So first story tonight comes from esecurityplanet.com. I can only assume that domain sounded like a great name back in the early 2000s. But anyway, it's a pretty good story. Title here is 10 Security Projects CISOs Should Consider from a Gartner analyst.
Now, just warn everybody up front, this is very buzzword heavy.
It is buzzword heavy, but it struck me as actual pointed recommendations so that was kind of what resonated with me. Now, I will say, before we get into that list of 10, they actually have a predecessor list of 10. These are 10 things that you should already have been doing. And so once you get through that list, then you focus on the new list. So just very quickly, the stuff that you should already be doing. Number 1, upgrade to the latest endpoint protection platform offering with fileless malware detection, memory injection protection, machine learning, and other features.
So Malwarebytes, good. Got it, check.
Yep, Malwarebytes, that's right. Remove administrative rights from Windows users where possible. It's probably not possible anywhere, so check. Implement an IAM program with automated provisioning and deprovisioning. Active Directory does that, right?
That's identity and account management, by the way.
Oh, really?
For those who didn't know, I'm helping.
Okay.
I help.
Thank you for helping. Perform regular patch management. Yearly is regular, so that's good. Implement a standardized server/cloud workload protection platform agent. No idea what that is. Implement robust anti-spam technical controls. Spam assassin. Use some form of SIM/log monitoring solution, basic detection and response. Use backup and restore for ransomware protection, because we have not talked about that one to death, and how that actually doesn't necessarily help you all that much. By the way, I mean, these are actually good recommendations. You have a case of the Mondays. I have a bad case of the Mondays. Conduct basic security awareness training, also highly effective, and improve perimeter security, including URL filtering for internet access. So those are the things that you should already have in place.
So what if I don't? What do I do?
Well, I would assume if you don't, then this next list is not for you. So if you don't have those, you should first off reevaluate your life, and then you should probably go and figure out how to get those things done.
Okay.
All right. So top security projects for 2018. Number 1, privileged account management. Right. So this is.
So this goes beyond IAM to more sophisticated management of my privileged accounts, like my admins and my service accounts, and
correct. And typically, it usually involves some level of monitoring, right? In addition to management. Then they give a list of potential vendors, and I'm sure.
And it looks like he's talking multi-factor authentication as well.
Right, and I'm sure, given that this was from a Gartner analyst, that these are probably somewhere on a Magic Quadrant. Vulnerability management project is number 2, and this is not necessarily what you think, right? So this is kind of like what we've talked about the past couple of times is in terms of prioritizing remediation of vulnerabilities, not necessarily identifying vulnerabilities, but prioritization.
Risk-based decision making on which patches I go after first.
Exactly right. Right. And then anti-phishing. So you want to add some SPF to your spam assassin for anti-phishing. Which by the way is, again, I'm having I'm having a case of the Mondays, but this is good stuff, right?
I'm biased. I think phishing is still one of our number 1 avenue of attack. I don't want to put this one at the top of my list, personally.
I agree, and I've had some experience with some of the vendors that they mentioned, and and some of them, by the way, are really, really good. So, it's almost it's almost at a point where you don't have a good excuse for not doing well with this anymore. The providers are really good.
And by the way, the article referencing has usually 4, 5, 6, 10 vendors listed under each of these. We're just not, boring you with all of them.
Correct. And again, I assume that they're listing off vendors that were probably somewhere on the on the Magic Quadrant for this area. All right, application control on server workloads. I actually think this is also highly important. That we've talked about the importance of this typically in the context of workstations on the show before, but this does really make sense also for servers, and I know that that probably causes a nervous twitch in a lot of people, a lot of sysadmin type people. But it is. I would argue that application control, aka application whitelisting, is probably a lot easier to manage on a server estate than on a workstation estate, because there's just not as there isn't as much change in as wide a diversity of applications. So
and they've come a long way in terms of their manageability and impact, and I definitely think it's a good thing to look at.
Absolutely. So and it kind of goes back to the point that antivirus is just not that effective. So micro segmentation is number 5, and there's actually, this has probably got the largest set of potential vendors to go and pick. And I've looked at this professionally a couple of times, and it's not a well congealed market. I mean, there's all sorts of different approaches to this, and so I'm not looked into each and every one they have here, but I would say you have to have a little bit of patience to figure out if you're going to investigate this. You got to look for something, some organization or some company or provider that has something that's going to work in your environment.
Yeah, they have nearly 20 different vendors here. A lot of them are small vendors.
Right.
This is an interesting market. I think it still has some maturing to do for sure.
Yep. Detection and response. So basically like EDR. That's also pretty important. The whole EDR thing reminds me, and I know this is probably going to sound kind of dumb, right? But the CEO, I think it was a CEO or COO or one of the C something O's of CrowdStrike a while back, had a big press release, and he was talking about kind of metrics to improve on. And I think we may have covered it on the show, but he was basically talking about how it's really important for you as an organization to improve on key metrics like the time to detection, the time to detect an infection, and the time to remediate and things like that. And this is one of those kind of key capabilities that you need in place to work on those metrics. Now, it's not coincidental that CrowdStrike is also on the list of vendors here, but I think the point is valid, even if it is from a vendor.
Yeah, and they break that up into EDR, which is endpoint detection response. I don't even know what EPP stands for. Endpoint
protection.
I have no idea.
I don't know.
And then also user behavior analysis. So
Correct.
2 different areas there.
Right. Let's see. And then actually they go further down, right?
Yeah.
With deception technology, so basically honeypots, managed detection and response, MSSP. So basically, out enabling your MSSP to be more, kind of more end to end.
And so they lump this all under, more detection capability, basically.
Yeah, I did find that a little bit odd that they kind of threw everything into that bucket. But hey, I didn't write it. So number 7, cloud security posture management project. So, basically something like a CASB. By the way, we've talked about that to some extent. I don't think CASBs are necessarily, CASB, by the way, is the Cloud Access Security Broker. They're definitely not a panacea or a silver bullet by any stretch of the imagination. And we've talked at length on previous shows about some of the difficulty we have, or many organizations have, with kind of the proliferation of cloud services in organizations that are driven outside of the IT department, maybe even inside the IT department. So next is automated security scanning. So this is more of a I would say a little more traditional, although application focused, right? So they're talking more more application scanning and integrating that into your again, assuming that you're a DevOps type shop, but integrating application scanning into your application development flow.
So like code analysis and automated code scanning. Yep. And yeah.
Yep. And then there's another CASB, right? So yeah, I mean,
you can never have too much CASB, apparently.
You can never have too much. And then number 10 is a software defined perimeter,
which is an interesting term.
Yeah. So, look, I'm not entirely sure if the intention of this is trying to drive down to the zero trust type concept, but it certainly seems like, just based on the names that are here, that they're more talking about kind of dynamic provisioning of connections with third-party entities, which, by the way, is kind of frightening. So,
because you're moving the automation and trust to something else.
Yeah.
As opposed to
a
person being in the loop. Well, potentially.
Correct. And I suppose you can probably architect it however you want it and get comfortable with it. But, I get the kind of the heebie-jeebies when I think about, automatically establishing connections with third parties when we know that third parties are a big source of network pollution.
Well, what's interesting too is I don't disagree with these projects, but they're all huge projects. And to say that you should, I think any organization of any decent size, and I should say maybe over 10,000 users, would probably struggle to get one of these done in a year, much less 10 of them.
Yeah, I think that's probably true on almost any scale, because if you're smaller than that, you're lacking funding. So,
correct.
But I don't think the intention was to say, this is what your portfolio of projects should look like. I think what they're saying is, here's a list of things that you should consider for investment in 2000.
Top value. Yeah. The things that show the most value. And I don't disagree at all. I would probably go down the anti-phishing first, PAM second, and then risk-based vulnerability management third, if I had to pick my top three.
Yeah. And then at the very end, the Gartner analyst indicated that by his estimation, there were 5 of those items that would reduce financial impact by successful attacks by 80% by 2020 over 2017. So he's basically saying if you implemented risk-based prioritized vulnerability management, privileged account management, anti-phishing, application control on servers, and automated security testing and development, you would reduce the financial impact of successful attacks by 80%. So
that's a pretty bold claim.
It is, but that's what analysts do, right?
The other thing I'd say is that everybody's organization is different, and you've got your own needs. So there's not really a one size fits all list, but these are great things to consider and focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. So next story comes from an odd source. It comes from CanadianUnderwriter.ca, and the title is "Data Breach Defendant Must Hand Over Computer Forensics Report." So There is a casino in Canada called Casino Rama. They had a breach back in 2016, I believe it was, and I'm not entirely familiar with the Canadian legal system, but as best I can tell, there's a couple of lawyers who are jockeying to be the lead lawyer in what effectively I guess is a class action lawsuit. And one of the challenges that they have is demonstrating to the court how large the class of affected people in the breach are. And apparently it's not entirely clear to me if the casino has not been forthcoming with the number of people who were breached or whatnot. But anyway, these lawyers subpoenaed or they asked the judge to compel production of forensics reports. In this case, they were reports provided by Mandiant. There were two. There was one related to the cause of the breach and the other related to a set of recommendations. And now I guess it's not quite that bad, but I guess the sections of the report that they have to turn over are anything related to the scale of the number of potentially impacted people in the breach. But all that's very interesting. But the reason I wanted to bring this up is in IT and IT security, we tend to think about things in kind of plain terms. We go and we get the job done. But one of the things we have to be cognizant of is when you write something on behalf of your business, right? A lot of times that stuff is discoverable. And so, if you are involved in incident response or what have you, and you are, kind of speculating, oh my God, it's, we completely forgot to patch the server and that's how the breach happened. Or, anything you write like that can potentially come back to bite you, whether or not it actually was true. You really want to be very careful about speculation. You have to walk the line of getting the job done, and sometimes a lot of what we do does require speculation and chasing down a hypothesis. But you've got to be cognizant that anything you put pen to paper on or put in an email is likely going to be discoverable. And from that perspective, phone calls are very good in an incident because there's not necessarily a record of what was said. Not that look, we've talked in the past about ethics, and this is not to say that you should not be ethical or hide anything. The point is, in the course of investigating incidents or kind of in the normal course of business, you can create unfortunate artifacts, kind of like what this casino is dealing with right now. They can come back and bite you if something were to go wrong. Some opposing counsel can take your email out of context and use it against you. So anyway, I just, this is something that I've learned over the years, and I like to use this podcast to help other people learn too. So,
as a reminder, Jerry is not a lawyer, nor is he your lawyer.
That's
Nothing
right.
on this podcast should be considered legal advice.
Correct.
If you follow our advice and get sued, we're sorry.
That's right. I'm trying to help you not get sued, by the way. So.
And that ends the disclaimer portion of our show.
Yeah, right. So, by the way, while I'm on this rant, I want to rant about one more thing that's completely unrelated. Please, one more time, please get rid of those stupid ass legal disclaimers at the bottom of your emails. Do it now. Go in and do it now. Now.
But Jerry.
No. No.
Everybody does it.
So you want to cause your legal counsel or general counsel's hair to stand on end. Go ask them, how well the concept of legal privilege will hold up on their documents when you have every email you send in the company is classified as privileged and confidential. It's not going to work.
Next, you're going to tell me login banners that say that you're not allowed to use the machine unless you're authorized are useless.
Well, no, those are good. And by the way, I also think that we need an RFC for like a normalized XML based thing for a risk register, right?
So the bad guys can look it up before they attack us?
Yes.
And if it's in my risk register, they can't use it?
They cannot use it. It's off limits. The risk has been accepted. It's off limits. Like, I don't even know why I have to come up with this crap, people. This should already exist. Anyway.
I think it did once, and the government suppressed all knowledge of it.
That you're probably right.
That's probably the technology the Roswell aliens were giving us that we've hidden all these years.
That's probably right. All right. Moving on. Next story comes from the Register. Title is No Questions Asked. Windows Code Cert Slingers Fuel Trade and Digitally Signed Malware. Story here is we all like to trust signed code. Even most application whitelisting, vendors actually give you the option to trust signed code. But the story here is that some security vendor was tracking distributors, I guess, of otherwise authorized distributors of Microsoft Authenticode certification or certificates, and found that apparently there's a pretty active underground market where at least 4 different organizations who are authorized to resell Microsoft Authenticode certificates will give you one if you are willing to pay a price. And so they've observed actual signed malware,
which destroys the entire point.
Absolutely.
Right? These trust mechanisms are only supposed to be used. Let me try that again. These, ability to cryptographically sign code with a trusted vendor cert is supposed to be only granted to known, trusted, good code from non-malicious sources. So this completely subverts the entire trust mechanism there. And then the question is, why aren't we now immediately revoking trust for these certificate providers?
Well, I think they are. I think that but the problem is it's an arms race. So and also I think the problem is, if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe that Windows has the concept of a certificate revocation list for signed binaries. I could be wrong on that, but I think that's true. So they actually, the researchers here came up with a website called signedmalware.org, and it is a repository of Authenticode certificates that they've observed as having been used to sign malware. Now, just to give a little more detail, they pointed out that in years gone by, the big threat was attackers or adversaries were going after companies trying to steal their valid certificates, but apparently they're finding it to be much easier just to buy their own. So
there you go.
Yes, so there you go.
One more thing to worry about.
That's right. And if you needed one more thing to worry about, and if you were also jealous of the GDPR and you happen to live in California, I've got great news for you.
Yeah?
Yeah. So there is there's a new law that was just passed. And the story here comes from bankinfosecurity.com, and the title is California's New Privacy Law. It's almost GDPR in the U.S. Almost. Yes.
Yay.
Yeah, so it doesn't have nearly as cool of a name as the GDPR. It's the AB 375. I mean, it rolls off the tongue, right? But yeah, so the AB 375 is the new California data privacy law, and it gives some similar concessions. I don't know what the right, the rights to data subjects that people have in Europe under the GDPR. It has, gives you the right to go to a data controller and request data to be changed, to be for them to produce what data they have about you, why they have it, and that sort of thing. And also it levies some requirements on data protection. I have not yet found if there's an onerous fine attached to this. I did a little bit of digging before the show, but I wasn't able to find anything. So I don't know if it has the big stick like the GDPR does. But in general, I think that it'll take some time. But the reality is more and more jurisdictions are going to be adopting what we would have previously called pretty onerous and unreasonable data protection regulations, at least in the U.S. That's what we would consider that. But that's the new normal, right? And from a personal perspective, we should all be, I think, probably pretty happy about that. From a professional standpoint, maybe we're not so happy, but there it is. I do know, for instance, that Canada and Australia have made comments, in the direction of implementing or adopting laws similar to the GDPR. So, this is getting real. Put your helmet on and start protecting that data. So, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I'm of two minds. You said it. I can't really add much more of that. From a personal standpoint, it's great. From a professional standpoint, it's going to be a big pain in the arse. But for California to do it first, with all the tech companies based in California, is a pretty big deal. And, the reality is once most companies figure it out for one state, it's not nearly as difficult to replicate whatever those controls are, protections, whatever, in other states. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think most companies are going to have to start dealing with this.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is this law doesn't go into effect until 2020, and the authors of this are quick to point out that the law is eligible for amendments up until 2020. So,
and there are very, very powerful tech lobbies out there.
Yes, there are.
Not getting into politics at all, but there's some very strong interests that may try to counter this. So we'll see what the final end result looks like.
Yeah, and something that you mentioned does trouble me a little bit, and that is, each state here in the U.S. I think one of the kind of stepping back for a second, one of the things that GDPR tried to do in Europe was establish a harmonized data protection law across all of the European Union. So you didn't have dramatically different data privacy laws between one country and a different, and that enabled, let's say, a bank or some company that was handling data in one country. All they would really need to do would kind of follow their home country's data protection law, and then kind of by de facto they would they would comply with the laws of all the other European countries, and that's not going to be the case in the U.S. Right? That each state is going to implement, almost guaranteed, dramatically different and probably oftentimes contradictory data protection laws, and there's going to be some pain ahead. So
yep.
I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
That's why I'm basing all my servers in Sealandia.
Good plan. All right, and then the last story we have for today comes from Errata Security. This was, I thought, a great blog post. I think Rob wrote this, right?
Yep, by Mr. Rob Graham.
Yeah, so
who doesn't listen to the show, so probably has no idea we're talking about him. But hi, Rob.
That's right. That's all right. So the title here is Lessons from NPETYA, aka NotPetya, aka a whole bunch of other things, 1 year later. So this past Thursday was the 1 year anniversary of NotPetya. And Rob goes on to point out that it was very likely the most expensive single attack in history, cyber attack in history so far. And he points out that companies like FedEx lost 300 million, and Maersk and Merck lost similar amounts, and lots and lots of other companies lost in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And it was, we talked about this to death. You can go back and listen to all the old episodes, but I mean, this impacted companies globally, even though it was apparently a targeted attack against the Ukraine. It kind of pointed out some of the pervasive failures we have, or pervasive interdependencies and interconnectivity risk we have across our industry, right? So anyway, the point of the article here, and just to my words, to paraphrase what Rob is saying, is that a lot of media reports are kind of hitting the easy button when they talk about NotPetya, and they point out that 1 year on we haven't learned our lesson, we're still terrible at patching, and isn't that a shame? If we could just swallow hard and try harder and do a better job at patching, things like NotPetya wouldn't happen. But he rightly goes on to point out that patching had nothing to do with this. The real underlying problem with NotPetya was far more complicated than you can reasonably explain in kind of a public or an article,
a mass consumption article.
There you go, exactly, mass consumption article. It's much more nuanced and complicated than that, and nobody really seems to have the appetite to talk about that. So,
except us and Rob Graham.
Except us and Rob Graham. And I've kind of been railing on this in my personal blog for a while too, that this stuff is complicated, right? And NotPetya, if you really understand what was going on, should be a big wake-up call to how we're designing our networks. And Rob, by the way, does a great job of stepping through some of that stuff, talking about how this, again, was not related to patching, patching or not patching. It was the result.
Well, to be fair, the initial infiltration came from an auto update patch of a piece of accounting software. So patching played a part, but you're talking about not applying, OS patches and regular patches. Yeah.
Correct. I mean, if anything, patching caused the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
That particular, the trust of the auto patch of a trusted vendor. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he actually goes on to point out something that I've thought about, but not really seriously in the past. And that is, if you have something that's auto updating, right? And more the challenge with his advice is the pervasiveness with which auto updating stuff is, has gotten. But he's pointing out that, if you got stuff that's auto updating, you may want to consider somehow implementing like microsegmentation, so that thing has limited ability to propagate out if something like this were to go awry again.
But I'm struggling with that because I think auto updating is a wonderful thing 99% of the time.
Correct. And, this is one of the few times that it's gone off the rails, but it went off the rails in kind of spectacular fashion.
Yeah, so I get what he's saying, right? And it all comes down to assume breach, assume any individual host could be compromised, and how do you contain that compromise from moving too laterally or moving around the organization too easily? And that makes sense, right? And also, it stole a bunch of credentials. So how do you do privileged account management? How do you do account management? How do you harden your Windows environment so that your credentials aren't so easily harvested and easily replayed, especially your admin credentials for your environment, which is a much, much tougher problem to solve than just go patch your stuff.
Yeah, correct. And considering how you design the trust between different Active Directory domains and ensuring that your administrators have the minimum amount of permission that they actually need, not that is convenient, but that they actually need to do their jobs, because it's hypothesized that one of the reasons this was so pervasive was that the malware jumped onto a system that used an automated version of Mimikatz and PSExec Mimikatz to interrogate the memory of the server, to find clear text passwords in the LSAS in the LSAS process, and then just propagate out. And if one of those accounts it found was a domain admin, it was game over.
Yep.
You were hosed. And so it's hypothesized that some of these really, really pervasively impacted companies probably had had domain type administrators logging into systems, and there it goes. So anyhow, point is, this stuff is getting much more complicated than can be addressed in kind of like simple platitudes, like just try to patch harder or train your employees, or this is very nuanced, and we've got to not kid ourselves about that.
So that's why we'll spend 3 minutes on the show and then move on.
Yeah. Well, but anyway, please read the article. It's well worth the read. I'm not going to do it justice, so go ahead and read it. Think about the implications of it. Again, think about the choices you've made in the past and how this.
So read it, then go to your room and think about what you've done.
That's right. Exactly right. Exactly right. So
fair enough. Anyway,
that is the stories in the show for tonight. So thank you very much for listening. Happy 4th of July / Independence Day to our American listeners. And
indeed, yeah. And for our British listeners, we forgive you. I hope you forgive us for our ungrateful colonist ways.
That's right. That's right.
No, it's all good. And be safe, guys, especially around fireworks. I've seen some nasty accidents, so please be safe.
Yeah, it's really hard to do the whole cyber thing without all those fingers.
It's true.
So anyway, thanks again. We will talk again real soon, hopefully next weekend. Take care.
Thanks. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.